What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we've got our Week 10 fantasy football running back starts and sits for every single matchup. So make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. And let us hear it in the comment section. You agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have. We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Real quick, before getting into our breakdown, a quick word from our partners at Prize Picks, which is our favorite DFS site of choice this NFL and fantasy football season. If you guys aren't familiar with them, do yourself a favor and check them out. In fact, when you sign up right now and use code ADP, you get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And look, we're already doing all this research for fantasy football matchups. So why not take advantage of it and get some profits as well? Prize Picks, well, they allow you to basically do exactly that. They have so many different player prop bets, not only in terms of single stat DFS, but also in terms of fantasy score. And you can combine them any which way you want. Super simple, super easy to use. All you have to do, choose two more players from the board, and then just pick the over-under on their projected fantasy score or on their single stat. Again, pretty much for every single matchup as the week progresses, those options will be updated even more so. And then the great thing is you've got two different options in terms of how you want to bet it, whether it's a flex play, so that way you can miss one of your selections but still win. Obviously, that's the safer choice. Or if you want more bang for your buck, check out the power play, where if you get all your picks correct, well, you win even bigger. So again, check all of that out. Details in the description. We kick off Week 10 on Thursday night with the Ravens at the Dolphins. And here I'm primarily looking at the Baltimore side of things. First and foremost, does Latavius Murray return in Week 10? He's missed some action now, and in the meantime, it's kind of been a combo of Devonta Freeman and Le'Veon Bell. If Murray sits out, I'd rather go with Devonta Freeman, a little bit more so involved in the passing attack and getting slightly more usage as a rusher compared to Le'Veon Bell. But in reality, this is kind of exactly what I said since the beginning of the season when all those Baltimore running backs got hurt. The guy that's going to benefit the most is Lamar Jackson, and you see it week in and week out. So none of these guys really are RB1s or really high-end RB2s unless it's a really great matchup. I do like the matchup versus the Dolphins, but it's not an extraordinary one, whereas these guys are kind of, over in terms of their best days behind them in Murray, Freeman, and Le'Veon Bell. So for that reason, and especially if Latavius Murray is healthy, you sit Devonta Freeman. Murray's going to be touchdown dependent, probably going to be an RB3, low-end RB2 at best. For the Dolphins, Myles Gaskin, obviously the big name, had a pretty decent outing this last week versus the Texans, but that was an awesome matchup. I don't think that's how it's going to play out here versus the Ravens. I think that Baltimore can absolutely, go up on Miami. And in that case, the Dolphins are going to have to abandon the run. Gaskin has been up and down, inconsistent, pretty much this entire season to begin with. So it doesn't give me all the confidence in the world. And another storyline, what if Tua doesn't play on the short week? I think that's going to mean even worse things for this rushing attack for the Dolphins, because maybe it has to be abandoned even earlier because, there's issues at the quarterback position and trickles down offensively to everyone. So for that reason, I would be fading Myles Gaskin in this game. Then Saints at the Titans. I'll start Alvin Kamara here. It's a good matchup versus the Titans. The defense doesn't scare me all that much. I'm curious to see whether the Saints will continue to go with Simeon, which if they do, I like what that means for the rushing upside for Kamara compared to, let's say, if it was a Taysom Hill. And I do think that Simeon probably looks at Kamara a little bit more so as a pass catcher. So, a low-end RB1. The addition of Mark Ingram has lowered his rushing ceiling a bit. There's no question about that. But I still think Ingram is primarily a handcuff for Kamara, just like the good old days. For the Titans, no Derrick Henry, and you saw what that meant this last week. Now, it was versus a very good Rams defense, but one that really didn't show up all that much. Surprising win for the Titans, I would say. Adrian Peterson was the guy that, kind of had the most success, found the end zone. But in my opinion, Jeremy McNichol is not that far behind AP in terms of rushing opportunities and more involved as a pass catcher. And I think that's going to be the determining factor here. In PPR formats is mainly where I would take a chance on McNichols. Otherwise, I really don't love any of these running backs. I think it's kind of going to be a committee type of situation. Peterson isn't going to get the volume that Derrick Henry saw. Nobody is. Peterson's going to be touchdown dependent. McNichols, maybe not the best standard suited guy. And then Foreman just from time to time is a change of pace guy. So McNichols is really the only guy I'm looking at. And that's primarily, I would say, kind of if you're desperate, boom or bust type of guy, primarily in PPR, in the running back 3 conversation. Then Bills at the Jets. This one's curious to keep an eye out for Zach Moss for the Bills. Exited last week with a head injury, so those can be serious. But this is a good matchup. So Singletary, if Moss is not there, could be in line for a pretty decent fantasy performance. If Moss is there, it's tough to really trust either one of these guys. It's what I've been saying all season long. When they're both active, they just vulture each other to a very large extent. And the rushing attack for the Bills isn't as high of a priority as some other teams, put on it, where both the guys can be relevant. So that's what has me worried. Right now, I would guess that Moss doesn't play. In that scenario, I think Singletary can be a mid-level RB2, maybe even high-end RB2 versus the Jets. And for New York, Michael Carter is a guy that, even though he didn't have as great of a week as we thought versus the Colts, he's still the main guy for the Jets, being utilized as a rusher and as a pass catcher. Now, speaking of pass catchers, Ty Johnson is a guy that I would start if first and foremost, Mike White is under center, because he seemed to prioritize getting the ball to Ty Johnson out of the backfield a little bit more so. And then also if Tevin Coleman does not play yet again, because I think Coleman kind of had that pass catching role a little bit more so. So a lot of things to keep an eye out for here. If you've got Ty Johnson and you've kind of been streaming him effectively these last couple of weeks, I think we could potentially, be getting to an end of that if Mike White doesn't play and if Coleman returns. Michael Carter, though, feel a lot better about, and I think he can actually also be in the RB2 range, similar to a Singletary here. Afterwards, Lions at the Steelers. Go with DeAndre Swift. I love him in PPR. Yes, he's had like a handful of bad games, but as far as what he can do as a pass catcher, he's pretty much a cheat code in PPR, so you go with him there. One of the better pass catchers on this Lions team. For the Steelers, I think Najee Harris has a chance to be a top 3 running back in terms of fantasy this week. The Lions defense stinks. Harris is utilized as a rusher, as a pass catcher. You love to see it for fantasy purposes. And anytime the Steelers can take away, pressure off of Big Ben, then they're going to do so. Harris, I think, is in for a great RB1 performance. Then I'll sit Jamal Williams here, kind of a guy that's been, I think, the forgotten man for the Lions the last couple of weeks. I don't like his usage as a pass catcher as of late. That's something that I was excited about. Swift is kind of taking over that role. So I'm going to be fading him here. If you're looking just pure rushing upside, the Steelers also have a good rush, just a good defense in general. So for that reason, I would be fading Jamal Williams here. Afterwards, Jags at the Colts. I'll start James Robinson if he plays. Obviously, he missed week 9 with that heel injury. Now, Carlos Hyde was okay, but, that was a weird game versus the Bills. I still don't know how the Jaguars, were in that game and won that game, most importantly. But I don't think, lightning is going to strike twice versus the Colts. I think the Colts can pull away from the Jaguars. And if that's the case, Carlos Hyde, not really utilized as much as we'd like to see as a pass catcher. I think the rushing attack gets put, kind of in the back burner. So I'm not all that high on Carlos Hyde. But Jonathan Taylor, similar to Najee Harris, I think he's going to be in the top 3 running back conversation in fantasy this week. Absolutely killed it versus the Jets in week 9. The guy's being utilized extremely, extremely well. Scary thing is, it could be even better in terms of the carries and volume he's given. And again, a great matchup versus the Jaguars. I'd be sitting Naheem Hines here. Yes, I know he's also coming off a rather good performance, but they've been far and few in between, and they've been rather inconsistent in terms of Hines putting up good numbers. So for that reason, I would be fading him versus the Jaguars, even though it's a good matchup. I think it's going to be Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, kind of, what we've seen so far work for the Colts. Hines just a little bit too boom or bust for my liking. Afterwards, Bucs at Washington. Leonard Fournette continues to be the only running back you can confidently start for the Bucs, the most consistent by far. So, ergo, Ronald Jones, Giovanni Bernard are fades for us. For Washington, this might seem as a surprise, but I'd actually start McKissick and sit Antonio Gibson. The reason for that, the Bucs rush defense absolutely sensational. And I could see the Washington football team going down early and just having to abandon the rushing attack. If that's the case, you go to the pass-catching running back afterwards, and that is McKissick. Gibson, yes, coming off the bye week, but how's the health? We don't really know. He's been less than 100% seemingly all season long. McKissick, he's the pass-catching running back here. I think he could be a sneaky play in PPR, and as crazy as it sounds, I know you drafted him early. I hate this matchup for Gibson. I would be sitting him here. Then Browns at the Pats. Nick Chubb coming off a huge performance this last week versus the Bengals. Now, I don't think it's going to happen again necessarily versus the Patriots. Maybe they're a little bit more disciplined, but you still got to really like Nick Chubb, especially in standard formats. A top 10 running back in fantasy, fire him up, RB1 type of guy. For the Patriots, Damian Harris, it was a little bit, concerning maybe. I don't know if that's the right word versus the Panthers when guys like Brandon Bolden and Ramondre Stevenson, who I do have both as sits, were getting more opportunities and breaking off bigger plays than Damian Harris. Is this trending towards a running back by committee? I'm not sure, but Harris still remains the guy that I would prefer. We know that Bill Belichick does weird things with the running backs, how he utilizes them in general. But Harris is the guy that I have the most faith in. If you're forcing me to pick one of these guys, primarily a standard suited fantasy running back. I think, if he doesn't get a touchdown, he's an RB3 conversation for what that's worth. And then D'Ernest Johnson, as long as Kareem Hunt is out, he's kind of the replacement, but he's not getting nearly as much usage and enough focus offensively as Kareem Hunt was. I think that makes sense. I don't think he's quite as good as Kareem Hunt. And for that reason, I would be sitting him here. Then Falcons at the Cowboys. Cordero Patterson. You start him every week. As long as he has the running back designation and he's being used like a wide receiver, that's a cheat code. That's what we all pray for and hope for in terms of, the running back position. And that's pretty much a cheat code because he's putting up like high-end RB2 numbers, potentially even low-end RB1 numbers. I think it can continue versus Dallas. Mike Davis, he's a sit, just not getting enough usage. The running game on its own here for the Falcons, not all that great. Patterson's values, again, coming from what he's doing as a pass catcher, so just pointing that out there. Obviously, a little bit more valuable in PPR formats. For the Cowboys, Ezekiel Elliott, nothing too crazy here. Tony Pollard, he's in the backup handcuff conversation. It's Zeke, I think, even though he didn't have the best week versus the Broncos, I mean, to be fair, really nobody on Dallas did. It's kind of surprisingly. He should bounce back here versus this Falcons defense and is in the RB1 conversation for fantasy purposes. Moving on, Panthers at the Cardinals. Christian McCaffrey came back this last week. Kind of limited, didn't get his usual workload, but he still totaled over 100 yards rushing and receiving combined, which is crazy. So that's really nice to see. And I think, going forward, he's only going to get more and more involved. So he is back in that, must-start conversation. For the Cardinals, James Conner, the highest scoring running back in fantasy this last week. Absolutely bananas. Obviously, that is as a result of Chase Edmonds getting hurt. Unfortunate, but the news that's come out is it's a high ankle sprain. Those usually take between 4 and 6 weeks to heal. So seemingly for the time being, James Conner could be, a weekly winner here, and that's going to be really valuable. So you start him. Yes, the Panthers defensively not all that bad, but I think the Cardinals offensively, they can overwhelm Carolina. I expect Kyler Murray and those guys to come back. And yes, Murray will take away some rushing upside from Connor, but I still think he has the touchdown upside. I think he's going to be a high-end RB2 on the week. And then with McCaffrey back, Hubbard is a fade. Benjamin for the Cardinals without Chase Edmonds, he saw some action, but I think Connor is the main guy. I wouldn't get too cute here with this backfield, especially with Kyler Murray also coming back, hopefully. So it pretty much just James Conner for Arizona. Afterwards, Vikings at the Chargers. This one's pretty simple. Dalvin Cook, Austin Eckler. Chargers run defense, not all that great. Dalvin Cook could be in for another big game here. In fact, that is kind of what I expect. So I really like him as a top 5 running back option on the week. Austin Eckler didn't find the end zone this last week. Kind of disappointing, but still put up all right numbers. I think he's going to have a bounce back performance. These kind of I don't even want to call it a subpar performance from Eckler, but just maybe a little bit underwhelming. Haven't happened all that much. I think he can absolutely bounce back. I'm not worried about him at all. Absolute lock RB1 for him as well. Then Seahawks at the Packers. This one's a little bit tough on the Seahawks side of things. They're coming off the bye week. Russell Wilson should potentially return. Same with Chris Carson. And I will say, once Russell Wilson returns to the Seattle offense, this entire offense is on a whole nother level. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, the wide receivers, are actually viable, but the running backs will also be a lot more viable. And that's going to be pretty valuable for fantasy purposes. Now, if Chris Carson returns, then I'm fading Alex Collins, then even forget about Rashad Penny. If Carson doesn't return from IR, though, I think Alex Collins would be worth a start here versus the Packers in a game that I think could be rather high scoring. And then for Green Bay, I anticipate that Rodgers clears COVID protocols and plays. That Packers offense then means will be back to its high-scoring self, not what we saw versus the Chiefs with Jordan Love under center. So Aaron Jones should be back in the RB1 conversation for fantasy football. And then A.J. Dillon, too big play dependent, so we are fading him there. Afterwards, Eagles at the Broncos. I really don't know what year it is because Jordan Howard is somehow relevant in fantasy. I mean, these last couple of weeks, he's had touchdown success. This last week, he led the Eagles in terms of rushing attempts. I don't know if it was a one-off, but the fact that he's also being utilized in the red zone and he's got the touchdown upside, in standard leagues, I'd kick the tires on him, as crazy as it sounds. And I know the Broncos defensively just had a great outing versus the Cowboys without Von Miller. But again, I think that was more so of a fluke than a long-term kind of indication. So Howard in standard formats, I think like RB3, RB2 type of situation. For Denver, Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon, I've got both of them as starts. Now, again, I want to point out, we're not going to see from the Broncos, especially offensively, what we saw versus the Cowboys this last week every single week. And by that, I mean them absolutely jumping out to a huge lead, blanking the opposing team, going into like the fourth quarter, just absolute craziness. And, that's the reason why both these guys almost had like 20 rushing attempts each, which doesn't happen. It's usually the half of that. But this Eagles defense, not all that intimidating either. So I think Williams and Gordon can both have some value on the week. But again, I think probably going to be in the similar camp to Jordan Howard, low-end RB2, high-end RB3 type of conversation, touchdown dependent. Definitely don't expect what we saw from them in that Dallas Cowboys game. And then for the Eagles, I'm sitting Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell. Boston Scott might end up being the guy for the Eagles at the running back position this week. I'm not sure. It's close to a 50-50, kind of coin flip situation, but I think Howard has the slightly higher upside, so I'm sitting Scott. I don't think there's going to be two fantasy relevant running backs from the Eagles this week, and then just forget about Kenneth Gainwell, unfortunately. Afterwards, Chiefs at the Raiders. We'll see if Clyde Edwards potentially, maybe can come back this week. I think there's going to be some murmurs about that, but if he doesn't play, Darrell Williams, he's in the mid-level RB2 conversation, even though this Chiefs offense is kind of broken, which is definitely concerning. For the Raiders, Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake. To me, this Chiefs defense is also broken, in comparison to the entire team also being broken. Again, concerning. But the Chiefs' defense is really, one that I don't know how they're going to get it together if they don't play Jordan Love every single week. So I think Jacobs and Kenyon Drake can have some success. I'm higher on Josh Jacobs, especially in standard leagues, because he gets the usage. Drake is kind of, more so a little bit of a dart throw in PPR formats, because I don't think he's going to get like 7-8 receptions every single week like we saw in week 9. So keep that in mind. But again, I think he's worth the dart throw, especially in this matchup versus the Chiefs. And then we go to the Rams at the 49ers. Darrell Henderson, yes, the Rams somehow came off, a dud game versus that Titans defense. Everyone pretty much other than like Cooper Kupp was disappointing. But I think Henderson is going to bounce back. I think the Rams are going to bounce back. So I like him here as a low-end RB1. For the 49ers, Elijah Mitchell. So if you picked up Elijah Mitchell early on in the year, kudos to you, because it seems like, well, even with Jeff Wilson returning, forget about Trey Sermon, Mitchell is still the guy, and I think it'll continue here. Again, I expect a bounce-back performance from the Rams as a whole, offensively, defensively, so I don't think we're going to necessarily see, a huge game from Mitchell, but he's by far the highest upside running back. I think he's in the RB2 conversation for the week. Then, like I said, Wilson in his first game back, fading him last week. Didn't really do much. Same situation here. Sony Michel, clear backup to Darrell Henderson, so no thank you there either. Mainly a handcuff. With that, though, we wrap up our Week 10 fantasy football running back starts and sits for every single matchup. And as always, let us hear in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.